Hi, I'm Sherlock. Welcome to my new mystery case.
It was in the jaundiced November of that year, when the fog lay like damp wool upon the city, and even the gas lamps seemed to burn with a sickly pallor, that Dr. Watson found himself once more at Baker Street, drawn by the old companionship and the indefinable air of expectation that always hung about those rooms when Sherlock Holmes had turned his restless mind upon a problem. The coal fire burned with a steady glow that fought the creeping chill in the corners, and in the window a smear of London's grime patterned the glass with spiderweb traceries that diminished, but could not defeat, the view of the murky thoroughfare below. Holmes lounged in his habitual chair with one long leg crossed beneath the other, and his violin resting idly at his side, having maintained silence for some minutes. His eyes held that inward look Watson had learned to read as the mind's lamp turned down to a blue glimmer. The Persian slipper upon the mantelpiece, with its familiar bulge, seemed to smile its thin leather smile as if it too were aware of some impending activity. Watson had been detailing, without much attention from his friend, a trivial case from his medical practice when the wire at the bell gave a peremptory jangle that could only have been produced by someone unaccustomed to waiting. Mrs. Hudson, with the air of one resigned to the eccentricities of genius and government, ushered in a tall, spare gentleman whose thin lips and iron-grey whiskers suggested the habit of command and the perpetual curbing of an inward impatience. There was an air about him, something in the cut of his broadcloth, in the curl of his hat brim, in the very manner in which he took the chair Holmes indicated, that told of the club, the house with a walled garden, and a certain discreet influence at Westminster. Holmes's grey eyes had flicked over him in a movement so slight that another might have missed it. In that instant he seemed to have taken the man's measure and filed him in his mental index. Sir Marius Ellingworth, he murmured, as if the name were the least of the matter. The gentleman started visibly. "Mr. Holmes, you have the advantage of me." "It is my business to maintain a small advantage," Holmes returned, with the weary courtesy that sometimes shadowed his speech. "The left cuff of your coat is glossed with river mud, and your right glove bears the faintest suggestion of tar. You came by the embankment this morning, and only those in a hurry use the faster waterman stairs at Whitehall. The thickness of your silk takes the cold worse than ordinary. Your ears are reddened, a sign of an unaccustomed walk in this fog, and the faint ammonia scent upon your sleeve is the distinctive perfume of the first-floor corridor of the Home Office. You have been nearly an hour at your desk before deciding the matter required a more elastic intelligence than that of your underlings. It is the common lot of permanent officials to defer until they can defer no longer. Sir Marius's lips twitched in something like relief that disguised itself poorly as irritation. "Very good, Mr. Holmes. I do not come with a trifle. Scotland Yard has the matter in hand, of course, but prefers a private consultation where public failure carries too steep a price," Holmes finished smoothly. "Dr. Watson, if you would kindly ring for tea. Our visitor appears to have swallowed more of London's atmosphere than is agreeable." "Tea, not coffee. I can detect that he slept poorly. There is a metallic quality to the breath that denotes wakefulness in an overheated room." Watson did as requested, suppressing the familiar mixture of amusement and admiration that Holmes's swift deductions always provoked. He had witnessed the detective perform more astonishing intellectual gymnastics, yet the swiftness with which he could strip away a man's outer garments and reveal the skeleton beneath never failed to impress him. Sir Marius did not wait for the refreshments. "Mr. Holmes," he said, leaning forward as the firelight struck glints in his grey hair, "a man was found dead in a four-wheeler outside Charing Cross Station shortly after 9 o'clock last evening. So far, nothing extraordinary for a London night, but the man's name was Sir Rowland St. John, lately returned from Calcutta and entrusted with papers of considerable delicacy. The papers have vanished. The driver swears that he conveyed his fare from the Criterion in Piccadilly to the station without drawing rein, and that no person entered or left the cab during the journey. A street sweeper, however, is equally insistent that he observed a veiled lady of most remarkable canary hue approach the cab in the thickest part of the fog between Piccadilly Circus and the Haymarket, exchange words with the gentleman within, and pass him what the sweeper describes as a message. Within the hour, the gentleman was dead. Scotland Yard finds itself divided between those who would arrest every woman in London possessing a yellow garment and those who suppose our driver to be a liar. It is essential that neither opinion finds its way into the newspapers. Holmes made a small movement with his long fingers that always reminded Watson of drawing a single thread from a complex tangle. You are wise to exercise discretion. By what means did Sir Rowland meet his end? A puncture at the base of the skull, so slight as to be nearly invisible, Sir Marius replied, with a shudder he could not entirely suppress. The divisional surgeon believes some subtle poison was introduced through the wound. There has been mention of prussic acid, though the characteristic odour of bitter almonds was not detected. The Yard's toxicologist remains non-committal. Most intriguing, Holmes murmured, in that quiet tone which Watson knew meant his friend's mind had already begun constructing its elaborate framework. And the gentleman's hands? Unmarked, save for what the report describes as faint abrasions upon the left wrist as if from the pressure of a leather strap. The document pouch was carried on the left side, naturally. Sir Rowland was right-handed, I presume? Undoubtedly so. Yet he permitted a complete stranger to approach the left side of his conveyance. Most curious indeed. Watson, who prided himself upon his trained powers of observation, could not resist interjecting. Most four-wheelers position their better lamp upon the driver's right side, Holmes. In such fog, any person would naturally approach from the more illuminated side. Holmes's mouth curved in its briefest of smiles. Excellent, Watson. You observe correctly, yet there remains more to be observed. Sir Marius glanced between them with an expression more human than his initial formality had suggested. You will examine the scene. If I venture anywhere, I shall go where the facts reside, not merely where reports have been filed, Holmes replied. Pray tell me more of the victim, Sir Rowland St. John, his habits, associates, potential enemies. A confirmed bachelor of 42 years, possessed of a cool head during his service in India, where he made himself invaluable to the Viceroy on several delicate occasions. He maintained a taste for fine dining and, I am informed, for music hall entertainments. No romantic entanglements of which we are aware. He was commissioned to deliver into the Secretary of State's personal custody a draft agreement concerning certain Persian commercial interests, the specific details of which would be inadvisable to discuss. You understand the sensitivity of the matter. Holmes's eyes had drifted to that half-closed state Watson recognized as intense concentration. I understand nothing until I have made my own observations. However, I accept your preference for avoiding public scandal. What of the cabman? Currently detained at Scotland Yard under Inspector Lestrade's supervision. Ah, Lestrade, Holmes murmured, with that faint inflection balancing patience and mild exasperation. And this street sweeper who claims to have witnessed the mysterious lady? Vanished like the very fog itself, Sir Marius responded. We possess his description from a constable, a youth with a pronounced hare-lip and an oversized cap. It is believed he lodges somewhere near St. Martin's Lane, though those who shelter beneath the arches tend to relocate when official interest is shown. Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing the tea service, And for a moment, the domestic comfort of china and biscuits made the sinister matter at hand seem all the more ominous by contrast. Holmes accepted a cup, raised it briefly to his lips, then set it aside untasted. "There remains one additional detail," Sir Marius said suddenly, as if reluctant to burden them with yet more disturbing information. Upon the cab's interior lining, where Sir Rowland's head had rested, investigators discovered traces of some yellowish substance, greasy to the touch. Initial speculation suggests it originated from the horse's tackle or perhaps a lamplighter's glove. There was also a scent. Indeed, Holmes prompted with renewed interest. Very faint but distinctive. The attending constable described it as flowery in nature. My clerk, a young man whose sister performs upon the stage, identified it specifically as mimosa. I confess I lack the expertise to judge such matters myself. "Mimosa," Holmes repeated, allowing the word to fall like a pebble into still water. "And this woman your sweeper observed, she wore yellow, you said?" "A veil and what he termed a canary-coloured mantle. He reported that when she lifted her veil to speak, her complexion appeared remarkably pale by contrast. The boy did not." Sir Marius cleared his throat delicately. He provided no further description of her features. Watson observed the familiar play of thought across Holmes's sharp features as his internal machinery shifted and realigned. It reminded him of those long-ago evenings in Afghanistan when, armed with only a map and fragments of intelligence, he had attempted to divine the disposition of an unseen enemy encampment. Yet Holmes, with scarcely more material than a soldier's rumour, could already perceive the outline of some hidden design. "You were correct to seek consultation," Holmes declared finally. "However, you must be entirely forthcoming with me. Sir Rowland travelled unaccompanied this evening. From his lodgings in Jermyn Street to the Criterion, where he dined alone. He departed at precisely 10 minutes past 8. He encountered no one of significance save the waiter and the establishment's manager, both of whom knew him well. He was, however—" Sir Marius hesitated momentarily. He appeared to be in rather poor spirits. The manager mentioned that he took exception to a gentleman who stared at him with unusual persistence. "This individual remains unidentified." "Unknown to the manager, perhaps, but hardly unknown to all," Holmes observed. "Did this mysterious observer leave any trace of his presence?" "A brand-new sovereign upon his table. The manager recalled it specifically because of its pristine condition." Holmes's eyes opened fully, their grey depths suddenly alert. "Newly minted, you say, and Sir Rowland settled his own account with the cabman?" "The sovereign bears no connection to the cab fare, Mr. Holmes. It merely represents—" "It represents nothing mere whatsoever," Holmes interrupted sharply, then immediately softened his tone with characteristic contrition. "Forgive my abruptness, Sir Marius. It is my unfortunate habit to speak curtly when my mind races ahead. A freshly minted sovereign bears a slight burr upon its rim that will mark a gentleman's thumb if he handles it carelessly. I trust an examination of Sir Rowland's right thumb will prove illuminating." Watson, having treated countless minor injuries in his medical practice, nodded his understanding, though he could not entirely follow the chain of reasoning his friend was constructing. Holmes's mind operated along rails invisible to ordinary mortals, and one could only trust that the locomotive would reach its intended destination. "Then you will accept the case?" Sir Marius inquired, rising as if the agreement had already been secured. "I will examine the available facts," Holmes corrected. "Should they present me with a genuine case, so much the better for your department's interests. Watson, your hat and coat, if you please. Sir Marius, be so good as to inform Inspector Lestrade that I shall call upon him at the yard within the hour. And if I may suggest, Keep the newspaper reporters well away from this matter. Nothing proves more destructive to a delicate investigation than a penny-a-liner armed with sensational metaphors about mysterious fogs. Sir Marius gathered his belongings with visible relief. At the threshold he paused, as if the weight of his official responsibilities pressed heavily upon him. "Mr. Holmes, there is considerable speculation within my department that this affair may have roots in foreign intrigue. If Sir Rowland has fallen victim to, if this represents— Do not conjure phantoms before you have measured the footprints they allegedly leave behind," Holmes advised with that sudden, almost fierce gentleness that sometimes emerged when confronted with genuine anxiety. "We shall speak again after I have examined the interior of that four-wheeler myself." After their visitor's departure, Watson could not restrain his curiosity. "Holmes, do you truly believe that a woman could have—" "I believe nothing at this preliminary stage," Holmes replied, already shrugging into his overcoat. "I merely observe that a sulphurous fog capable of yellowing men's very collar points is hardly conducive to accurate colour perception. A canary-hued mantle may appear such under gaslight. The identical garment viewed by daylight might reveal an entirely different dye. A scent of mimosa clinging to a gentleman's cuff may tell us considerably more about his recent companionship than any waiter's testimony could provide. And a newly minted sovereign abandoned upon a restaurant table represents the smallest of coins when weighed against the price of a human life. Come, Watson, London is our great stage, and if indeed there exists a woman in this yellow fog, she is as likely to be a skilled actress performing upon it as some supernatural apparition." The wind greeted them sharply as they descended to the street, and the fog pressed its cold fingers against their throats. Baker Street loomed like a tunnel through which horses and pedestrians moved more by instinct than sight. A newsboy, his face muffled to the eyes, called out something indistinguishable about parliamentary proceedings, while a lamplighter moved like a ghostly figure detached from some cathedral's stonework. They climbed into a waiting cab, Holmes providing directions in a tone that would brook no delay from either driver or horse. Watson drew the travelling rug over his knees and pulled his hat lower, conscious as always at the commencement of a case of his quickening pulse and that peculiar sharpening of external detail. The gleam of moisture upon the harness leather, the rhythmic swish of the horse's tail that accompanied their ventures into London's mysteries. He glanced at his companion, and in the set of Holmes's jaw and the distant brightness of his grey eyes he read the familiar signs he had learned to trust implicitly. Whether this matter involved a woman concealed by yellow veiling or a man in the plainest of garments, whether it touched upon music-hall gossip or the most sensitive affairs of state, it would be pursued by that singular intellect with a rigour that owed nothing to atmospheric conditions, and even less to governmental anxieties. As their cab's wheels began their careful, muffled progress through the streets, the great city seemed, for them at least, to draw back its concealing curtains in anticipation of the revelations to come. The cab that bore them through London's fog-choked arteries moved with the cautious deliberation of a blind man navigating familiar rooms. Holmes sat in contemplative silence, his sharp profile occasionally illuminated by the passing glow of street lamps that struggled against the yellow murk like drowning suns. Watson found himself studying his companion's expression, noting that quality of intense inward focus that invariably preceded his most brilliant deductions. The very air seemed thick with more than moisture. It carried the weight of mystery, and Watson felt his pulse quicken with the familiar anticipation that marked the commencement of their most challenging cases. Their destination proved to be not the main entrance of Scotland Yard, but a lesser-known courtyard where a solitary gas lamp cast its wan circle of light upon wet cobblestones. Here, under the watchful eye of a uniformed constable whose breath formed ghostly plumes in the cold air, stood the four-wheeler that had served as Sir Rowland St. John's final conveyance. The vehicle appeared unremarkable in the dim light, a standard London cab with dark panels beaded by condensation, its brass fittings dulled by the pervasive damp. Inspector Lestrade emerged from the shadows with his characteristic brisk efficiency, though Watson detected beneath his professional manner the particular frustration that marked a case refusing to yield to conventional investigation. "Holmes," he greeted, his voice carrying that familiar blend of relief and professional wariness. "I confess myself entirely at sea with this business. We have examined every inch of this conveyance, questioned every available witness, and find ourselves no closer to understanding how a man can be murdered in a locked cab without his driver's knowledge." Holmes approached the vehicle without ceremony, producing his lens and pocket lamp, and with the fluid motion of long practice. "The impossible, Lestrade, frequently proves to be merely the improbable viewed from an incorrect angle," he observed, opening the cab door and stepping inside. The interior smelled of damp leather and stale tobacco, with an underlying fragrance that, once detected, seemed to permeate every breath. Watson watched as his friend's keen eyes swept over every surface, cataloguing details invisible to ordinary perception. Holmes knelt upon the worn floorboards, his lamp casting sharp shadows as he examined the dark upholstery where a passenger's head would naturally rest. There, faintly discolouring the fabric, lay a yellowish smear that caught the light with an oily sheen. "Mimosa," Holmes murmured, touching the substance with his fingertip and raising it to his nostrils. "But not the simple perfume of a lady's handkerchief. This has been adulterated, mixed with some mineral compound to achieve a particular consistency." He transferred the minute sample to an envelope from his waistcoat. "Observe the left window, Watson. It has been lowered precisely 2 inches, and the condensation patterns suggest it remained so throughout the journey. The right window, by contrast, is sealed tight." Lestrade shifted impatiently. "The driver claims the gentleman appeared to be dozing, his head turned toward the street as if watching for landmarks." "Indeed," Holmes replied, his attention now focused upon something near the window frame. With delicate precision, he lifted what appeared to be a single pale filament. "Human hair, Lestrade, fine and light, with the end slightly singed as if from proximity to a curling flame. Not Sir Rowland's, certainly. His was darker and coarser. The hair joined the yellowish substance in his envelope. They proceeded to the police mortuary, where Sir Rowland's earthly remains lay beneath a sheet that seemed too small to contain the magnitude of the mystery surrounding his death. Watson, drawing upon his medical training, examined the tiny puncture at the base of the skull, while Holmes studied the victim's hands with particular attention. "There," Holmes said softly, indicating a faint crescent mark upon the right thumb. "The caress of a newly minted sovereign's burr. Our gentleman handled fresh currency within hours of his death." He then turned his attention to the left wrist, where faint reddening marked the skin. "And here, Watson, and the impression of a leather strap, worn intermittently and removed before death. The dispatch case was not upon his person when he died. Their interview with the cabman, a weathered fellow named Perks, who possessed the honest demeanour of one unaccustomed to deception, proved illuminating in unexpected ways. The fog was that thick, sir, he explained, turning his cap nervously in his hands. But somewhere near the Haymarket I heard what seemed like a lady's voice, not speaking, mind you, but humming a tune, soft and musical-like, with a foreign sound. To it! My gentleman shifted in his seat, and I heard him say something sharp, though I couldn't make out the words. Holmes leaned forward with renewed interest. This humming? You are certain of its character? Aye, sir. Sad it was, like a lament. My missus sings such melodies when she's melancholy. And there was something else. When I found the poor gentleman at Charing Cross, his right hand was clenched tight around something." Perks hesitated, glancing nervously at Lestrade. A yellow rose petal, fresh as morning dew despite the fog. Holmes rose abruptly, his grey eyes bright with that particular intensity Watson had learned to recognize as the first stirring of comprehension. "The pieces begin to arrange themselves, though the pattern remains obscure," he murmured. "Lestrade, we must examine the criterion and trace Sir Rowland's final steps. But first, I require a detailed description of this mysterious street sweeper who claims to have witnessed our veiled lady." As they prepared to leave the yard, Watson could not suppress his growing excitement. The case had begun to reveal its complexity, a web of foreign intrigue, mysterious women, and calculated deception that promised to test even Holmes's extraordinary powers of deduction to their utmost limits. The sergeant detailed to the street sweeper matter approached them with the methodical bearing of a man accustomed to tracking London's more elusive inhabitants. "Name's Ned Shuck, though the lads call him Lip Ned on account of his affliction," he reported, consulting his notebook with practised efficiency. "Frequents the archways beneath the Adelphi and St. Martin's Lane. Distinctive appearance, oversized cap with a torn peak, striped scarf in black and mustard, boots stuffed with paper. Quick to bolt when approached by authority, but the promise of coin might hold him long enough for questioning." Holmes absorbed this information with a single nod, his mind already calculating the tactical approach required. Post 2 plain-clothes men at either end of the arches, but keep them well back. If the boy appears, he must believe himself the hunter rather than the hunted. To Lestrade he added, "Hold the cabman Perks for further questioning, and send that rose petal to your chemist immediately. I require tests for glycerin compounds and oil of cassie." Their cab navigated the fog-choked streets toward Piccadilly with the cautious deliberation of a ship in treacherous waters. The familiar landmarks of London appeared and vanished like phantoms, transformed by the yellow murk into suggestions of their daylight selves. The Criterion's gaslit facade emerged from the gloom like a beacon, its warm windows promising respite from the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to press against the very soul of the city. The establishment's manager, a florid gentleman named Wickham, whose nervous manner spoke of a man unaccustomed to official inquiries, received them with anxious deference. He led them through the elegant dining room to a corner table still bearing the subtle impressions of recent occupation, its mahogany surface reflecting the amber glow of the gas fixtures above. "Sir Rowland favoured this particular table," Wickham explained, his voice carrying the practised discretion of one who served gentlemen of consequence. It commanded an excellent view of the room while maintaining sufficient privacy for confidential matters. Last evening, however, he appeared unusually agitated. He consumed barely half his customary portion and declined his usual port entirely. Holmes examined the table's surface with his lens, then turned his attention to the chair where the victim had sat. The upholstery bore faint impressions, and upon the wooden armrest, barely visible to the naked eye, lay traces of the same yellowish substance they had discovered in the cab. "The mysterious observer who disturbed Sir Rowland," Holmes prompted, "describe him with precision." Wickham's brow furrowed in concentration. "A man of foreign aspect, though his English carried no accent, medium height, well-groomed dark beard, and clothing of excellent quality, though not entirely fashionable by London standards. Most distinctly he wore spectacles that seemed to magnify his eyes, giving him an unsettling intensity. He occupied that table near the entrance for nearly an hour, consuming nothing but a glass of water, yet his attention never wavered from Sir Rowland. The waiter who had served both gentlemen, a sharp-eyed youth named Timothy, provided additional details that proved illuminating. The foreign gentleman's hands bore peculiar stains, sir, yellowish marks upon the fingertips as if from handling some chemical compound. When he departed, he left a pristine sovereign beside his untouched glass, placed there with deliberate ceremony. Most curious of all, throughout his vigil he hummed a melody, haunting and melancholy, with an oriental character that seemed to disturb Sir Rowland considerably. Holmes requested to examine the sovereign, which Wickham had retained as a curiosity. Under his lens, the coin's surface revealed not only the expected slight burr, but also traces of the mysterious yellow substance clinging to its raised edges. "Chrome yellow mixed with cassie oil," he murmured, transferring minute samples to his evidence envelope. "Stage paint adulterated with flower essence to mask its harshness. Such preparations belong more often behind theatrical wings than in a gentleman's pocket." Their investigation led them next, through fog-shrouded streets, to Sir Rowland's lodgings in Jermyn Street, where the building's proprietor, Mrs. Ashford, admitted them with a key that trembled slightly in her weathered hands. The rooms reflected their late occupant's methodical nature, books arranged with military precision, papers filed in careful order, personal effects maintained with the attention to detail of one accustomed to official responsibility. "Sir, Rowland returned from India with considerably more luggage than he had departed with," Mrs. Ashford observed, as they examined the chambers. "Several additional cases quite heavy, which he insisted upon carrying personally to his rooms. He seemed particularly concerned about one small leather portfolio that never left his immediate possession." In the bedroom, Holmes discovered what proved to be the most significant clue yet uncovered. Upon the washstand lay a yellow rose, its petals beginning to wilt but retaining the fresh appearance that spoke of recent delivery. Beside it rested a card bearing a single line of text in an elegant, feminine hand. "The debt of Kandahar awaits payment." Watson felt his breath catch as the implications struck him with sudden clarity. Holmes, Kandahar, that was where Sir Rowland served during the Afghan campaign, but what debt could drive someone to calculated murder? Holmes finished, carefully preserving both rose and card in his evidence envelope. "That, my dear Watson, illuminates the true nature of our mystery. This is no random crime of opportunity, but a carefully orchestrated act of vengeance whose roots extend far beyond the fog-shrouded streets of London into the treacherous passes of Afghanistan." Mrs. Ashford confirmed that while no visitors had formally called upon Sir Rowland during his brief London residence, she had observed him in earnest conversation with a veiled lady near the building's entrance 2 evenings prior. "She wore yellow, I remember distinctly, and carried herself with the bearing of quality." They spoke for perhaps 10 minutes before she departed in a waiting carriage. Sir Rowland appeared greatly disturbed by their encounter, pacing his rooms for hours afterward. As they prepared to depart the lodgings, Holmes paused at the window overlooking Jermyn Street, his sharp profile etched against the yellow murk beyond. The fog continued its relentless embrace of the city, transforming the familiar into the alien, the known into the mysterious. "The pattern grows clearer, Watson," he murmured, his grey eyes holding that distant quality that marked the approach of revelation. "We are dealing with someone who understands both Sir Rowland's past and his present circumstances with intimate precision. The question that remains is whether our mysterious woman in yellow represents the architect of this scheme, or merely another player in a game whose true master remains concealed in the shadows." A ragged boy emerged from a doorway as they descended to the street, his movements carrying the furtive urgency of London's forgotten children. "Beg pardon, gents," he called softly, but Lip Ned Says he's seen your canary lady again, and if you want the truth of it, you'll find him under the arch by the Lion's Head Tavern. 2 shillings buys it before another cove does, he says. Holmes's coin disappeared into the boy's grimy palm with practiced swiftness. Tell Ned his enterprise is appreciated, but warn him that others may be seeking the same information. Watson, we proceed on foot. Sound carries treacherously under stone arches, and our quarry has already demonstrated a talent for remaining 1 step ahead of official inquiry. As they turned toward the darker thoroughfares where the fog pooled in eddies and the ancient stones sent back their footfalls in hollow echoes, a human voice, low and desolate, drifted through the yellow murk. 3 descending notes that matched with chilling certainty the melody the cabman had described. Holmes stopped for the space of a heartbeat, his head inclining like a hound that has caught the scent of its quarry, and then they moved forward into the concealing embrace of London's fog, where truth and deception danced their eternal masquerade. The haunting melody seemed to guide them through fog-shrouded passages where London's forgotten souls huddled against the November chill. Holmes moved with predatory grace toward the Lion's Head Tavern, its amber windows glowing like malevolent eyes beneath the railway arch. The establishment squatted in perpetual shadow, where the rumble of trains overhead provided a bass note to the symphony of human misery that echoed through the stone corridors. Beneath the arch's deepest recess they discovered Lip Ned, crouched among makeshift shelters of canvas and newspaper. The boy possessed the sharp intelligence common to London street children, his eyes darting constantly between his visitors and potential escape routes. His hair lip twisted his speech into a distinctive whistle, but his words carried the precision of one accustomed to selling information to those who valued accuracy. 2 nights running I seen her, he began without preamble, his gnarled fingers clutching Holmes's offered shilling. First time near the Criterion, standing in that yellow fog like she belonged to it, but she weren't waiting idle-like. Circled the cab first, making sure of something. When she reached the left window, she hummed that sad tune, and the gentleman inside jerked like he'd been struck with a whip. Holmes leaned forward with that quality of intense attention that compelled even reluctant witnesses to speak freely. Describe their exchange with precision, Ned. Every detail may prove significant. The boy's eyes grew distant as memory sharpened his features. She said something about payment coming due, and he protested the matter was settled years past. Then she laughed, bitter as winter wind it was, and passed him something small and yellow through the window. A flower, I think, and a card. When he took them, his whole body went rigid, like he'd seen his own ghost. Watson found himself studying the boy's earnest expression. This woman's manner, did she move like one familiar with London streets? That's the queer part, sir. Knew every stone and shadow, she did, but her voice carried a foreign accent I couldn't place, not French or German, but something from farther off. Her hands were pale as milk, but strong-looking, working hands, not a lady's soft fingers, and the smell of mimosa hung about her like a cloud. Holmes produced his notebook, sketching rapidly. The gentleman with spectacles who accompanied her described him thoroughly. Tall and dark-bearded, with glasses that caught the gaslight. Walked with a slight limp, favouring his left leg, and his hands bore the same yellow stains as hers. When they parted, he pressed something into her palm that glittered like gold, then slipped into the service alleys like someone who knew the back ways as well as the front. The revelation struck Holmes with visible force. Most illuminating, this coordination suggests careful planning rather than spontaneous action. He rewarded the boy with an additional coin. One final question. Have you observed this woman elsewhere in the city? Ned's face brightened with the prospect of further payment. Aye, sir. She comes out the stage door of the Empire Music Hall of nights, wrapped in that yellow mantle. They call her the woman in yellow on the bills, and she sings foreign songs that make the audience weep, always carries a noseful of the mimosa flowers, she does. Holmes rose abruptly, his grey eyes bright with satisfaction. The Empire Theatre, barely a stone's throw from the Haymarket. Watson, we have found our mysterious chanteuse. As they emerged from the archway's fetid atmosphere, Holmes walked in contemplative silence, his hands clasped behind his back. The fog seemed to press more closely around them, as if the very atmosphere conspired to conceal the truth they saw. The pattern grows both clearer and more complex, Holmes murmured finally. Our woman in yellow is no phantom, but a professional performer with intimate knowledge of London's geography. Yet the very theatricality of her presentation gives me pause, Watson. The distinctive costume, the haunting melody, the mimosa, these form a carefully constructed tableau designed to be remembered. Watson felt his pulse quicken with familiar anticipation. Then she wishes to be identified as the culprit? Or wishes someone else to be exonerated by her obvious guilt? Holmes replied, his voice carrying that tone of quiet satisfaction that marked significant progress. A skilled criminal, particularly one involved in political assassination, rarely advertises their presence so overtly. We may be witnessing an elaborate performance staged for our benefit, but the question remains whether our yellow-clad songstress is the principal player or merely another actor in a more complex drama. The fog swirled around them as they hailed a passing cab, its single lamp a bleary eye in the yellow murk. Whatever secrets awaited them at the Empire Theatre, Watson sensed they would prove pivotal to understanding the true nature of Sir Rowland's murder and the mysterious campaign of vengeance that had brought death to London's fog-shrouded streets. The Empire Theatre emerged from the afternoon fog like a gaudy beacon, its ornate facade gleaming with moisture that caught and reflected the gaslight in patterns reminiscent of theatrical jewels. Despite the early hour, the building possessed that peculiar magnetism common to establishments where reality surrendered nightly to artifice, and even in daylight's grey embrace, one could sense the anticipation that would soon fill its gilded interior. Holmes approached the stage door with the confident bearing of one accustomed to gaining access to London's most exclusive venues, his sharp eyes already cataloguing details that would escape ordinary observation. The doorkeeper, a grizzled veteran whose weathered face spoke of intimate acquaintance with every variety of human drama, regarded them with professional wariness before Holmes's credentials worked their customary magic. The woman in yellow, the man mused, his voice carrying the theatrical cadence common to those who lived perpetually in performance's shadow. Miss Kamala Devi, though I suspect that's not the name her mother whispered over her cradle, came to us 3 months past with letters from the Calcutta Opera House and a manner that suggested she'd travelled farther than geography alone could account for. Sings like an angel touched by sorrow, she does, but there's something in her eyes that speaks of purposes beyond mere entertainment. Holmes absorbed this information with that quality of intense focus Watson had learned to recognize as the prelude to significant discovery. Her performances follow what pattern? Every evening, save Sundays, 9 sharp, wears that yellow silk that catches the calcium lights like captured sunshine, carries mimosa that she distributes to the front rows. The audiences can't resist her foreign melodies, particularly the military gentlemen who seem drawn by something in her manner that speaks to experiences in distant service. The doorkeeper paused, lowering his voice conspiratorially. She's not alone in her enterprise, mind you. Has a manager of sorts, Mr. Silas, he calls himself. Dark beard, spectacles that magnify his eyes something fierce, walks with a pronounced limp, always hovers during her performances, watching from the wings with an intensity that fair gives one the shivers. Watson felt his pulse quicken as the description matched perfectly their mysterious observer from the Criterion. Holmes's grey eyes brightened with satisfaction. "This Mr. Silas, does he possess any distinctive characteristics beyond his appearance?" "Reeks of some chemical compound, he does. Claims it's medicinal oil for his affliction, but it's got a yellow tinge that stains whatever he touches. And he's generous with fresh sovereigns when pleased with arrangements, always newly minted they are." The doorkeeper led them through narrow passages lined with costume trunks and abandoned scenery, the air thick with grease paint, dust, and that persistent floral sweetness they had learned to associate with their quarry. Miss Devy's dressing room occupied a corner where the railway's vibration created subtle tremors in the floorboards, and even through the closed door, Mimosa's exotic fragrance announced her presence. Holmes knocked with precise courtesy. The voice that bade them enter carried musical quality, though underlying its melodic surface lay something harder, controlled tension of a performer perpetually aware of her audience. Kamala Devi proved to be a woman of perhaps 30 years, with striking beauty common to those who commanded attention across footlight distances. Her dark hair was arranged in elaborate style, and her famous yellow costume hung nearby like a glowing second skin. Most significantly, her hands bore the telltale stains Holmes had learned to associate with the mysterious substance discovered at multiple crime scenes. "Gentlemen," she said, her accent carrying the distinctive cadence of educated Indian English, "I have been expecting your visit. When police begin questioning theatre folk, tragedy has usually found its way to our doorstep." Holmes settled into the room's single chair with fluid grace. "Miss Devy, we come as investigators of Sir Rowland St. John's death, under circumstances suggesting intimate knowledge of his personal history." The woman's composure never wavered, though Watson detected a subtle shift suggesting carefully controlled emotion. "Sir Rowland," she repeated without surprise. "A name that echoes through many lives, Mr. Holmes. His death, while tragic, cannot be entirely unexpected by those who knew his service in Afghanistan." "You speak as one familiar with that service," Holmes observed, his grey eyes fixed upon her face with unwavering intensity. Miss Devy moved to her dressing table, beginning the ritual of removing stage makeup with movements suggesting long practice. During the Second Afghan War, Sir Rowland commanded interrogations at Kandahar. His methods were thorough, his results deemed valuable to the Empire's interests. Her reflection met Holmes's gaze directly. Among those he questioned was a young woman accused of carrying messages between rebel camps. She died under interrogation, though official records list fever as the cause. Watson felt a chill that transcended the November fog. "This young woman possessed some connection to you." "My sister Priya was 17 when Sir Rowland's men dragged her from our village. Her crime was carrying letters between lovers separated by war's chaos. She died in that stone cell, and Sir Rowland's report described her as a dangerous spy whose elimination served imperial security." The revelation struck the room like a physical blow, and Watson found himself studying this woman with new understanding. The calculated performance persona, the deliberate yellow costume, the haunting melodies, all formed a campaign of psychological warfare directed at a single target. "You came to London specifically to confront Sir Rowland," Holmes stated without accusation. "I came to sing," she corrected, "and to ensure certain debts of honour were acknowledged. Sir Rowland's death, however, was not of my making. though I confess his suffering brought me no displeasure. Holmes rose abruptly, his expression suggesting some crucial puzzle piece had shifted into place. "Miss Devi, your honesty is refreshing but dangerous. If you did not kill Sir Rowland, then someone has used your public campaign as cover for their own purposes. You have been skillfully manipulated into providing the perfect suspect for a crime you did not commit." The woman's composure finally cracked, revealing beneath her theatrical mask someone who had suddenly realized the true extent of her peril. "Then who has used my grief as their weapon?" Holmes's smile held no warmth. "That is precisely what we intend to discover, but first you must tell us everything about your mysterious confederate, this Mr. Silas who has been coordinating your movements through London's fog-shrouded streets." Miss Devi's hands trembled slightly as she set down her makeup cloth. "Silas approached me in Calcutta, claiming knowledge of my sister's fate and offering assistance in my quest for justice. He arranged my passage to London, secured my position at the Empire, even provided the yellow costumes and mimosa that became my signature. I believed him a benefactor, seeking to right old wrongs." "Yet now you suspect otherwise," Holmes prompted gently. His knowledge was too precise, his arrangements too convenient. He knew details about Sir Rowland's habits, his dining preferences, his routes through London that no casual observer could have acquired. And lately... She hesitated, fear creeping into her voice. "Lately he speaks not of justice, but of larger purposes, of debts beyond my sister's death that must be collected." Holmes exchanged a meaningful glance with Watson. The conspiracy they had suspected was revealing its true scope, and Miss Devi was merely one instrument in an orchestra whose conductor remained hidden in shadows. As they prepared to leave the theatre, the fog seemed to press more closely around them, as if the very atmosphere conspired to conceal the puppet master who had orchestrated this elaborate performance of vengeance and misdirection. The urgency in Miss Devi's voice compelled Holmes to abandon his customary measured departure. Before they could leave the theatre entirely, she grasped his sleeve with sudden desperation. "There is something else, Mr. Holmes. Yesterday evening, after my performance, I discovered Silas in conversation with a gentleman whose bearing suggested military command despite his civilian dress. Tall and lean, with prematurely grey hair and a distinctive scar across the knuckles of his left hand. Most significantly, Silas addressed him as Colonel, though no surname was provided." Holmes's grey eyes sharpened with immediate interest. "This Colonel's manner toward you, describe it precisely." "He studied me as one might examine a weapon before battle, assessing capabilities and weaknesses. His questions concerned my knowledge of Sir Rowland's current activities and associates. I felt distinctly that I was being evaluated for some purpose beyond mere curiosity." Miss Devi's hands unconsciously smoothed the yellow silk of her costume. When they parted, the Colonel pressed something into Silas's palm that glittered like gold. Watson felt a stirring of recognition. "Holmes, the description suggests someone with extensive frontier experience, possibly involved in the same campaigns as Sir Rowland." "Indeed," Holmes murmured, his mind already constructing possibilities. "Miss Devi, you will accompany us to Silas's lodgings immediately. Your identification may prove crucial, and remaining here alone exposes you to considerable danger." The journey to Whitechapel carried them through London's most fog-shrouded districts, where the yellow murk seemed to concentrate in malevolent pools. The apothecary's shop occupied a corner building whose grimy windows reflected gaslight in fractured patterns, and the narrow stairs leading to the upper floors creaked ominously beneath their weight. Silas's rooms proved to be a revelation that exceeded even Holmes's expectations. The chambers resembled less a residence than a military intelligence centre, with detailed maps of London marked with coloured pins, photographs of various gentlemen arranged in careful categories, and extensive files containing what appeared to be surveillance reports. Most significantly, a large chart dominated one wall, showing the movements and associations of numerous individuals connected to Afghan service. Holmes examined the materials with growing fascination, while Watson studied a collection of chemical apparatus arranged upon a makeshift laboratory table. Among the glass containers filled with the familiar yellow compound, Watson discovered a more sinister device, a narrow leather strap with a small padded oval bearing a tiny brass clamp. Projecting scarce a line from its surface was a needle so fine it could barely be seen, its point faintly stained with the yellowish substance. The mark upon Sir Rowland's wrist, Watson observed, was made by just such a strap. Holmes nodded grimly, already examining a packet of cards bearing rose watermarks. One, inscribed in elegant feminine handwriting, carried the phrase they knew too well. "The debt of Kandahar awaits payment." From a nearby shelf, he selected a tiny, stoppered bottle and allowed the faintest vapour to reach his nostrils. "Gelsemium," he said quietly. "An Indian extract of deadly subtlety. A prick the size of a pin, and the heart forgets its duty." Miss Devi approached a desk covered with correspondence, her face growing pale as she read. "These letters detail not only my sister's death, but the fates of dozens of other civilians who died during interrogations. Silas has been collecting evidence of systematic atrocities committed by multiple officers during the Afghan campaigns." Holmes joined her at the desk, his sharp eyes scanning documents with remarkable speed. A particular file caught his attention, bearing the name Colonel Marcus Whitmore and containing detailed surveillance reports. The photograph within matched perfectly Miss Devy's description of her mysterious interrogator. "Whitmore," Holmes murmured, the name triggering distant memory. "Watson, do you recall this officer from our Afghan service?" Watson studied the photograph with growing recognition. Colonel Whitmore commanded artillery support during several of Sir Rowland's interrogation operations. His battery provided the firepower that convinced villages to surrender suspects for questioning. The sound of approaching footsteps upon the stairs brought their investigation to an abrupt halt. Holmes motioned for silence, positioning himself beside the door, while Watson drew Miss Devi into the shadows. The footsteps paused outside, followed by the distinctive scraping of a key in the lock. Silas entered with confident bearing, but his composure shattered instantly upon discovering his visitors. The bearded man's magnifying spectacles caught the gaslight as he stepped backward, his hand moving instinctively toward his coat pocket. "Gentlemen," he said in accented English that placed his origins in the borderlands between India and Afghanistan, "I fear you have discovered more than your safety permits." Holmes stepped forward with deceptive casualness. "Mr. Silas, you have orchestrated an elaborate campaign that has unfortunately resulted in murder. Your noble intentions cannot excuse the methods employed." Silas's laugh carried bitter satisfaction. "I seek only to balance accounts that British justice has chosen to ignore. Sir Rowland died as my sister died, as hundreds of innocents died." The revelation struck Watson with sudden clarity. "You are Miss Devy's brother." "Half-brother," Silas corrected, his hand hovering near his concealed weapon. "United by the same loss, divided by different worlds. I have spent 5 years preparing for this reckoning, and neither Scotland Yard nor Sherlock Holmes will prevent its completion." As afternoon light filtered through grimy windows, Watson realized with growing horror that they faced not merely a murderer, but a man prepared to die for his cause. Holmes remained motionless, his grey eyes fixed upon Silas with that quality of predatory stillness Watson had witnessed in moments of extreme peril, The chemical apparatus surrounding them seemed to pulse with malevolent potential, and the very air carried the weight of 5 years' accumulated vengeance seeking its final expression. "Your weapon remains holstered because you begin to suspect the truth," Holmes observed with careful modulation. "You did not kill Sir Rowland St. John, despite your elaborate preparations for that very purpose." Silas's hand froze above his coat pocket, his magnified eyes betraying sudden uncertainty. "What manner of deduction is this?" "The deduction of a man who has examined the evidence without the burden of preconceived guilt," Holmes replied, taking a measured step forward. "Your leather strap was designed for prolonged psychological torture, a device to weaken and terrify, not to kill swiftly. The puncture wound that ended Sir Rowland's life required surgical precision and intimate knowledge of anatomy that your surveillance reports do not suggest you possess." Miss Devi moved from the shadows, her voice carrying dawning comprehension. "Then who struck the killing blow?" Watson observed the subtle transformation in Silas's expression as Holmes's words found their mark. The bearded man's revolutionary fervor began competing with the horrifying realization that his carefully orchestrated campaign had been subverted by a more ruthless intelligence. "Colonel Marcus Whitmore," Holmes stated with quiet certainty. "The same officer who approached you months ago with intelligence about Sir Rowland's movements, who suggested the theatrical elements of Miss Devi's involvement, who provided the yellow costumes and mimosa that became her signature. You believed him a fellow seeker of justice, but he was orchestrating your sister's performance to provide perfect cover for his own murderous purposes." Silas lowered his hand slowly, his breathing becoming labored as the full scope of his manipulation became clear. The intelligence he provided about interrogation methods, the locations of other officers, all of it accurate because he participated in every atrocity he described to us. "Precisely," Holmes continued relentlessly. "Whitmore possessed intimate knowledge of Sir Rowland's habits because they served together for 3 years. He knew which restaurants Sir Rowland frequented, which routes he preferred, even his psychological vulnerabilities regarding past service. When Sir Rowland returned from India carrying documents of considerable delicacy, papers that likely contained evidence of systematic corruption and unauthorized executions, he became a liability that Whitmore could not permit to survive." The sound of approaching footsteps upon the stairs interrupted their revelation. Holmes moved swiftly to the window, his sharp eyes scanning the fog-shrouded street below, where several figures moved with official purpose. Silas laughed bitterly, reaching into his waistcoat to produce a small brass key. "Whitmore's insurance policy, no doubt. He always intended to eliminate all witnesses to his involvement." He held the key toward Holmes with trembling fingers. "This opens a warehouse near London Bridge where he stores documents too sensitive for official custody, evidence of systematic torture, unauthorized executions, theft of regimental funds, crimes that would destroy not only his career but his life." Holmes examined the key with swift efficiency, while Watson gathered the most crucial documents from the scattered surveillance materials. The approaching voices had reached the landing, accompanied by the distinctive cadence of Scotland Yard constables following official orders. "Your noble quest for justice was corrupted from its inception," Holmes observed, indicating the room's second window, which opened onto a fire escape. "Whitmore transformed your legitimate grievances into an elaborate performance designed to conceal his own crimes. The yellow costume, the mimosa, even the timing of Miss Devi's appearances, all his suggestions presented as tactical advantages while serving his strategic deception." Miss Devi approached her half-brother with sudden tenderness, her theatrical persona dissolving to reveal genuine familial concern. "Rahul, we can still expose his crimes through proper channels. Priya's death need not be compounded by serving another's murderous agenda. The sound of splintering wood announced that the constables had grown impatient with locked doors. Silas made his decision with the swift finality of a soldier under fire, following Holmes through the window onto the narrow iron platform that served as their escape route. As they descended into the fog-shrouded alley, Holmes paused to examine a document Silas had salvaged, a detailed schedule of Colonel Whitmore's movements, including a notation for that very evening. "He expects you to report Sir Rowland's death as accomplished," Holmes observed. "Your failure to appear will signal that his carefully constructed deception has unravelled." Watson felt the familiar quickening of pulse that marked the transition from investigation to direct action. "Then we must ensure he receives the report he expects, but from a source he will not anticipate." "Indeed," Holmes replied, his sharp profile etched against the yellow murk as he calculated their next moves. "Miss Devi, your theatrical skills may prove crucial in the hours ahead. If Colonel Whitmore insists upon meeting with his supposed accomplices, we shall oblige his expectation, though not in the manner he intends." The woman nodded with grim determination. "What role would you have me play, Mr. Holmes?" "That of a woman seeking justice for her sister's death," Holmes replied. "But this time, the performance must be perfect in every detail, for the audience will include a man who has spent 5 years orchestrating murder with the precision of a military campaign." As they moved deeper into London's fog-shrouded maze, Watson realized they were approaching the most dangerous phase of their investigation, a direct confrontation with an adversary who possessed both the resources of imperial authority and the ruthless determination of someone whose crimes had placed him beyond the reach of conventional justice. The yellow fog that had concealed so much deception would soon serve as the stage for their final, most perilous gambit. The warehouse near London Bridge emerged from the fog like a monument to imperial commerce, its blackened brick facade bearing decades of soot and river dampness. Holmes approached the structure with calculated precision, the brass key Silas had provided turning smoothly in a side entrance that spoke of recent and frequent use. The detective's sharp eyes catalogued every shadow that might conceal an observer, every potential escape route that a military mind might have prepared. Within the cavernous interior, Holmes's pocket lamp revealed far more than mere storage. Wooden crates bearing military markings stood alongside filing cabinets that suggested systematic record-keeping spanning decades. The air carried the distinctive scent of old leather and parchment, mixed with something more sinister, the metallic tang Watson recognized from field hospitals where death had lingered too long. Silas moved through the maze of stored materials with familiar confidence, his magnified eyes reflecting the lamplight as he led them toward a particular section where the crates bore more recent dates. "Whitmore showed me this location weeks ago," he explained in hushed tones, claiming it contained evidence we could use to expose military atrocities. "I believed him a fellow seeker of justice." Holmes examined the contents of several crates with growing fascination. Each contained meticulously organized documents, interrogation transcripts, execution orders, financial records detailing systematic theft of regimental funds, and most damning of all, correspondence between field commanders discussing the elimination of witnesses to their unauthorized activities. "These papers represent more than evidence of past crimes," Holmes observed, his voice carrying that quality of intense concentration Watson had learned to recognize. "They constitute a complete intelligence network spanning 3 decades of frontier service. Whitmore has been collecting compromising information about every officer who served under his command, creating a web of mutual complicity that ensures their silence." Miss Devi discovered a file bearing her sister's name, its contents confirming the systematic nature of the atrocities committed at Kandahar. The official reports bore little resemblance to the truth, describing necessary military actions while concealing the torture and murder of civilians whose only crime was existing in territory the Empire sought to control. Watson found himself studying a particular document bearing Colonel Whitmore's personal seal, a detailed plan for eliminating potential witnesses to his crimes, including Sir Rowland St. John. The precision with which the murder had been orchestrated revealed a mind capable of extraordinary calculation, treating human lives as mere obstacles to be removed with military efficiency. Sir Rowland's return from India represented an existential threat, Holmes murmured, reading over Watson's shoulder. His new position would have provided access to archived reports that might expose decades of systematic corruption. Whitmore could not risk such scrutiny. Having secured the crucial evidence, Holmes turned his attention to the trap itself. From his waistcoat he produced a small vial of theatrical makeup, darkening his beard and moustache with practiced efficiency. Silas's spare spectacles completed the transformation, while strategic application of the same yellow compound found at the crime scenes stained his fingertips appropriately. "The rendezvous Whitmore expects will occur precisely as scheduled," Holmes announced, studying his reflection in a grimy window. "However, the participants will not be those he anticipates. Miss Devi, your theatrical skills must convince him that his carefully orchestrated deception has succeeded completely." The woman nodded with grim determination, her yellow costume now serving a purpose far removed from mere entertainment. "What role would you have me play, Mr. Holmes?" "That of the unwitting accomplice confirming Sir Rowland's death, but gradually introducing elements of uncertainty that will compel Whitmore to reveal the full scope of his conspiracy." Holmes adjusted Silas's walking stick, perfecting the limp that would complete his disguise. "Watson, position yourself where you can observe the entire proceedings. At my signal, the dropping of a white handkerchief, Lestrade's men will close the trap." As they prepared to leave the warehouse, Holmes paused at a window overlooking the fog-shrouded Thames. The yellow murk that had concealed so much deception throughout their investigation would soon serve as the stage for their most perilous gambit. The great game of cat and mouse that had begun with a mysterious death in a four-wheeler was approaching its climactic resolution, where truth and justice would finally confront the systematic corruption that had flourished in Empire's darkest corners. The fog pressed against the glass like a living thing, as if London itself held its breath in anticipation of the confrontation to come. The warehouse near London Bridge had been transformed into a stage for their most perilous performance, with Lestrade's men positioned like chess pieces in the shadows between towering crates and filing cabinets. Holmes, his transformation into Silas now complete down to the nervous adjustment of spectacles and the subtle limp, waited near the central aisle, while Miss Devi stood wrapped in her yellow mantle, the familiar mimosa at her throat lending authenticity to her role. Watson had taken position behind a stack of India rubber goods that afforded him clear sight lines while remaining concealed, his service revolver a reassuring weight in his coat pocket. The fog pressed against the warehouse windows like grasping fingers, and the distant chime of 9 o'clock from St. Magnus, the martyr, seemed to hang in the thick air before dissolving into the yellow murk. Footsteps approached along the quay with military precision, neither hurried nor hesitant, and the side door opened with the careful exactness of a man accustomed to entering potentially dangerous situations. Colonel Marcus Whitmore entered with the bearing of one inspecting stores before campaign, his tall frame moving with controlled grace through the maze of crates. His iron-grey hair caught the lamplight, and his pale blue eyes held that quality of command Watson had observed in frontier officers who had learned to make life-and-death decisions without hesitation. The distinctive scar across his left knuckles was clearly visible as he removed his gloves and his right hand rested casually upon a walking stick whose leather grip showed signs of frequent use. "Silas," Whitmore greeted, his voice carrying the dry authority of the parade ground, "punctuality remains your most reliable virtue, and Miss Devi, you wear yellow with particular distinction this evening." Holmes inclined his head with the precise deference of a subordinate conspirator, his accent perfectly matching Silas's distinctive cadence. "We followed your instructions precisely, Colonel. Sir Rowland received both the rose and the card. The debt of Kandahar has been settled." Whitmore's shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly, and Watson detected the satisfaction of a man whose carefully laid plans had achieved their intended result. Excellent. The theatrical elements proved most effective. The costume, the mimosa, that haunting melody. Scotland Yard will undoubtedly arrest Miss Devi within days, and the matter will conclude with appropriate justice served. Miss Devi stepped forward with calculated uncertainty, her performance flawless as she conveyed both triumph and growing unease. "Colonel, I have done as you instructed, yet I find myself troubled by certain aspects of our campaign. The precision with which Sir Rowland died suggests more than amateur vengeance." Whitmore leaned forward with predatory interest, his pale eyes studying her face. "Your intuition serves you well, my dear." Indeed, Sir Rowland's elimination required more sophisticated methods than grief alone could provide. He paused, clearly savouring the moment of revelation. His return from India, carrying sensitive documents, threatened not merely individual reputations, but the stability of imperial administration itself. Holmes, maintaining his disguise, allowed Silas's voice to carry dawning comprehension. "You orchestrated our quest from its beginning." "From its very conception," Whitmore corrected with cold pride. "Your sister's tragic death provided perfect emotional motivation, while Miss Devi's theatrical background supplied the dramatic elements necessary to create a compelling suspect. Every detail, the yellow costume, the mimosa, even the timing of your approaches, was calculated to ensure the authorities would arrest her for crimes she did not commit." Watson felt his pulse quicken as the full scope of Whitmore's manipulation became clear. The Colonel's arrogance was driving him toward complete confession, exactly as Holmes had predicted. "The precision of Sir Rowland's death," Miss Devi pressed, her voice trembling with perfectly controlled emotion, "required surgical knowledge beyond what Rahul possessed." Whitmore chuckled with genuine amusement. "Your brother's device was designed for psychological torture, a tool to weaken and terrify. The actual killing required a more delicate touch." He withdrew a small leather object from his coat pocket, revealing the same strap-and-pad device Watson had discovered in Silas's rooms. One precise puncture below the occipital ridge, introducing gelsemium directly into the bloodstream. Even a divisional surgeon would attribute death to natural causes. Holmes chose that moment to remove Silas's spectacles, his grey eyes meeting Whitmore's with unmistakable recognition. "Colonel, you have been most accommodating in providing a complete confession before witnesses." Whitmore's hand moved toward his coat with lightning speed, but his military training warred with the sudden realization that his carefully constructed deception had collapsed entirely. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said with grudging admiration, "I confess myself impressed by your theatrical abilities, though I question the wisdom of confronting a man with nothing left to lose." "On the contrary," Holmes replied, producing a white handkerchief from his sleeve, "you have everything to lose: your freedom, your reputation, and your ability to continue destroying lives in service of imperial ambition." The handkerchief fluttered to the warehouse floor like a fallen leaf, and instantly Lestrade's men emerged from their concealment. But Whitmore's frontier instincts served him well. In the same motion that revealed Holmes's identity, he had palmed a second poison device, flicking it toward Miss Devi with practiced accuracy. Watson moved without conscious thought, striking the woman's arm aside so the deadly projectile clattered harmlessly among the crates. In that instant of distraction, Whitmore produced a phosphorus flare and raked it across a wooden beam. Flame licked hungrily at oil-stained wood and ancient papers, and acrid smoke began filling the warehouse with choking intensity. "Proof dies as easily as men," Whitmore observed with cold satisfaction, already moving toward the side door as Lestrade's constables struggled through the thickening smoke. Holmes shed his limping disguise and sprang after the fleeing colonel, his lean form disappearing into the fog-shrouded passages that led toward the Thames. Behind them, fire began its destructive work among the carefully preserved evidence of decades of imperial crimes, while the yellow fog pressed closer around the warehouse like a living thing eager to swallow all traces of their confrontation. Watson guided Miss Devi through the smoke towards safety, knowing that the final act of their deadly drama was about to unfold in the treacherous darkness along London's ancient river, where fog and water conspired to conceal the last desperate gambit of a man whose crimes had finally caught up with him. The Thames fog rolled inland like a living tide, transforming London's familiar docklands into a maze where sound carried treacherously and shadows concealed deadly possibilities. Holmes pursued Whitmore through narrow passages between warehouses, his keen senses tracking the colonel's movements by the distinctive scrape of his walking stick against wet cobblestones and the measured cadence of military boots that maintained discipline even in desperate flight. Watson emerged from the burning warehouse with Miss Devi, both coughing from acrid smoke that billowed into the yellow night. Behind them, Lestrade's men worked frantically to salvage crucial documents before the flames consumed Whitmore's carefully preserved evidence, though the systematic destruction of decades of imperial crimes proceeded with methodical efficiency. The fire's orange glow created hellish patterns in the fog, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock their efforts at justice. "Holmes has followed him toward the river," Watson observed, his medical training already assessing Miss Devi's condition while his soldier's instincts calculated the tactical situation. Whitmore knows these docklands intimately. His warehouses provided perfect cover for storing stolen goods and eliminated witnesses. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the murk, followed by Holmes's voice raised in sharp warning. Watson sprinted toward the Thames, his revolver drawn, following the narrow lane that led to ancient stone steps where watermen had plied their trade since medieval times. The fog seemed to thicken near the water, fed by the river's moisture and the industrial smoke that perpetually shrouded London's commercial arteries. At the water's edge, Watson discovered Holmes locked in combat with Whitmore upon a narrow wharf, slick with river dampness. The colonel had abandoned his walking stick, which lay broken nearby, its concealed poisoned needle glinting harmlessly in the gaslight. Both men moved with deadly precision, Holmes's lean strength matched against Whitmore's frontier-hardened desperation. "Your network is exposed, Colonel," Holmes declared between parried blows. "Your evidence destroyed, your crimes laid bare. There is no escape, only reckoning." Whitmore laughed bitterly, producing a small naval pistol from his coat. "You underestimate a soldier's will to survive, Holmes. The Empire has taught me that victory belongs to those willing to pay any price." The weapon's appearance changed the dynamic instantly. Watson raised his own revolver, but the fog and precarious footing made a clean shot impossible without risking Holmes's life. In that moment of deadly balance, Holmes demonstrated why his reputation extended far beyond mere deduction. With lightning swiftness, he kicked a loose plank from the wharf's edge. The heavy timber struck Whitmore's wrist with bone-crushing force, sending the pistol spinning into the Thames's dark waters. Before the colonel could recover, Holmes closed the distance, grappling with him at the wharf's very edge, where one misstep meant death in the river's treacherous current. The struggle was brief, but violent. Whitmore, despite his years, fought with the ferocity of a man facing the gallows, but Holmes's combination of scientific boxing and street fighting proved superior. With a decisive movement, he pinned the colonel against the wharf's railing, his knee pressed firmly against the man's chest. "The game concludes here, Colonel," Holmes stated quietly. "Your debt, unlike Sir Rowland's, is now truly settled." But Whitmore's military cunning had not deserted him entirely. As Lestrade's constables arrived with their lanterns cutting through the fog, the colonel made one final desperate gambit. From his waistcoat he produced a small glass capsule, raising it toward his lips with the swift motion of a man choosing death over dishonor. Holmes was faster. His hand clamped over Whitmore's jaw, forcing the capsule from between his teeth. The vial shattered harmlessly against the wharf's planking, its prussic acid contents hissing briefly before the Thames claimed them. "Even that escape is denied you," Holmes observed as the constables secured their prisoner. "You will face justice in an English court, not evade it through a coward's death." As they hauled the defeated Whitmore from the wharf, his face bore the hollow expression of a man whose carefully constructed world had crumbled entirely. The yellow fog, as if satisfied with its role in the night's drama, began slowly to dissipate, revealing the first faint promise of London dawn. Miss Devy approached the water's edge, removing the mimosa from her throat with trembling fingers. The exotic flowers, now forever associated with deception and death, fell into the Thames, where the current carried them toward the sea. "My sister's murder has been avenged," she said quietly, though not in the manner I anticipated when this began. "Justice rarely follows the paths we envision," Holmes replied with gentle understanding, "but it arrives nonetheless, carried by currents as inexorable as the Thames itself." Silas emerged from the shadows where he had watched the final confrontation, his face bearing the hollow exhaustion of a man who had outlived his driving purpose. "5 years of planning, and in the end, we were merely puppets in another's performance." "Your grief was real," Holmes assured him, "and your sister's death deserved justice. That Whitmore corrupted your quest does not diminish its validity. The documents we salvaged will ensure that other victims receive the recognition history has denied them." As they turned from the river toward the fog-shrouded city, Watson reflected upon the case's strange resolution. The woman in yellow had indeed been central to Sir Rowland's death, but as unwitting accomplice rather than calculating murderer, a pawn in a game whose true master now faced the full weight of British justice. The warehouse fire had been contained, though much evidence was lost. What remained, however, would prove sufficient to expose systematic corruption that extended far beyond one man's crimes. The Empire's darkest secrets, preserved in Whitmore's obsessive documentation, would now face the harsh light of official inquiry. Holmes paused at the wharf's edge, his sharp profile etched against the dissipating fog. "The pattern is complete, Watson. Every detail held its place, the lowered cab window to admit whispered threats, the chrome yellow to draw attention where it should not fall, the burr upon the sovereign marking nervous hands, the haunting melody to summon memory rather than recognition." But the true artistry lay in Whitmore's manipulation of genuine grief, transforming Miss Devy's quest for justice into perfect cover for his own murderous purposes. As they walked through London's awakening streets, the yellow fog retreated before the advancing dawn, taking with it the concealing veil that had hidden so much deception. Justice had been served, though at the cost of revealing corruption that would echo through Whitehall's corridors for years to come. The woman in yellow had sung her final lament, and the Thames had claimed another secret, carrying it toward the sea, where all of London's mysteries eventually found their rest. It was 3 days later when the familiar tranquility of Baker Street had been restored, though the morning papers carried headlines that would echo through Whitehall's corridors for months to come. Holmes sat in his accustomed chair, violin resting across his knees, while the Persian slipper upon the mantelpiece seemed to smile with satisfaction at having witnessed another triumph of deductive reasoning over criminal cunning. The yellow fog had lifted entirely, leaving London's familiar contours sharp and clear in the winter sunlight. Inspector Lestrade arrived precisely at 11, bearing the official reports that would close the case of Sir Rowland St. John's murder. His manner carried that peculiar satisfaction of a man whose professional reputation had been enhanced by association with superior minds, though Watson detected beneath his official bearing genuine admiration for Holmes's extraordinary performance. "The confession stands complete," Lestrade announced, settling into the chair Mrs. Hudson had thoughtfully provided. "Colonel Whitmore has detailed every aspect of his conspiracy, from the systematic elimination of potential witnesses to his manipulation of Miss Devy and her brother. The warehouse fire destroyed much evidence, but what remains has proven sufficient to expose corruption extending to the highest levels of military command." Holmes sat, aside his violin with fluid grace, his grey eyes taking on that familiar brightness that marked the transition from contemplation to explanation. The Colonel's arrogance proved his undoing, as it so often does with men accustomed to absolute authority. His need to demonstrate superior intelligence compelled him toward complete revelation of his methods. Watson leaned forward with keen interest. "You observed from the first something that eluded the rest of us. What was the hinge on which it all turned?" "3 trifles, Watson, each contemptible alone, yet together forming an unmistakable pattern," Holmes replied, his fingers steepled in characteristic fashion. "First, the burr of a freshly minted sovereign upon Sir Rowland's thumb, telling me he had handled new coin very recently and with considerable agitation. Second, the left-hand window of the cab lowered precisely 2 inches, and the condensation pattern showing where a gloved hand had rested while leaning inward. Third, a single pale hair with its end singed by a curling flame, caught in the window frame. Fresh gold, chrome yellow upon the coin's knurled edge, cassie oil in the air, and scorched hair. Such was the orchestra that led me from the Criterion to the Empire stage." Lestrade consulted his notebook with professional thoroughness. "Miss Devy and her brother have been released without charges. The Home Office has agreed to provide them with new identities and passage to Canada, where they may begin lives free from the shadows of this affair. Miss Devy expressed particular gratitude for your intervention, Holmes, noting that without your deductions, she would have faced the gallows for crimes she did not commit. The true artistry," Holmes continued, "lay in Whitmore's manipulation of genuine grief, transforming Miss Devy's quest for justice into perfect cover for his own murderous purposes. Every element of The Woman in Yellow was calculated misdirection. The chrome yellow stage paint marked the mysterious observer at the Criterion, establishing connection between Sir Rowland and exotic influence. The newly minted sovereign with its telltale burr served as calling card, creating evidence of conspiracy linked to Miss Devy's theatrical world. The haunting melody drew attention while creating atmosphere of foreign mystery, cementing the image of an avenger from distant lands. Watson found himself studying his friend's sharp profile. The strap mark on Sir Rowland's wrist? "An instrument of coercion, not death," Holmes explained. "Silas's device was designed for psychological torture, to weaken and terrify. The killing required anatomical precision that surveillance reports suggested neither sibling possessed. The puncture beneath the occipital ridge, with gelsemium introduced directly into the bloodstream, demanded surgical knowledge. The driver's testimony about low humming was crucial. It served as signal, not serenade, drawing Sir Rowland's attention to the left window, while Whitmore approached from the opposite side under cover of the thickest fog. Sir Marius Ellingworth's afternoon visit brought official gratitude tinged with bureaucratic relief. The Home Office had contained the scandal's most damaging elements, while ensuring that justice appeared to have been served. The documents recovered from Whitmore's warehouse would receive appropriate attention, though certain aspects would necessarily remain classified in the interests of imperial security. "Your discretion in this matter has been exemplary, Mr. Holmes," Sir Marius observed, his manner carrying the weight of governmental appreciation. "The systematic corruption exposed extends far beyond one man's crimes, touching the very foundations of frontier administration." Holmes's smile held no warmth. "I trust that appropriate attention includes justice for the victims whose deaths were concealed behind official reports of military necessity?" After their visitors had departed, Holmes stood at the window overlooking Baker Street, his sharp profile etched against the afternoon light. Watson sensed in his friend that quality of dissatisfaction that marked victories achieved at moral cost. "You are troubled by the necessity of it," Watson observed. "I am troubled by the pattern, Watson," Holmes replied quietly. "We have exposed one man's crimes while leaving the system that enabled them essentially unchanged. Whitmore will hang, but the attitudes that permitted systematic torture and murder remain embedded in imperial administration. The yellow fog that concealed his deception was merely metaphor for the greater obscurity shrouding the empire's darkest practices." A knock at the door interrupted his contemplation, and Mrs. Hudson announced the arrival of a young clerk, bearing a wire from the Home Office. Holmes read the message with growing interest, his grey eyes brightening with that familiar intensity that marked the beginning of intellectual engagement. "It appears, Watson, that our services are required in connection with a most peculiar matter involving the disappearance of certain diplomatic correspondence and a mysterious gentleman who claims to represent the interests of a Balkan principality." Holmes set the wire aside with evident satisfaction. "The game, as they say, continues." Watson reached for his coat with the automatic response of long partnership, already feeling his pulse quicken with anticipation. Whatever moral complexities their recent case had revealed, the essential work of justice continued, carried forward by minds capable of penetrating deception and exposing truth. As they descended to the street, Holmes paused to observe the evening's approach. London's capacity for concealing secrets remained undiminished, and somewhere in the city's maze of thoroughfares, new mysteries were taking shape, waiting for minds capable of unraveling their complexities. "The woman in yellow sang her final lament," Holmes murmured, "but the great symphony of human deception continues. The fog might conceal, Watson, but it can never permanently obscure the light of genuine understanding, carried forward by those willing to pursue justice through whatever shadows the world might cast across their path." The familiar comfort of their partnership, tested once again by London's most challenging mystery, would soon face new trials. But as they walked through the city's awakening streets, Watson felt that profound satisfaction that came from witnessing justice served and truth revealed, however complex the moral landscape they had been compelled to navigate. The case of the woman in the yellow fog had reached its conclusion, but the legend of Sherlock Holmes's extraordinary powers of deduction would continue to grow, one mystery at a time.